Hi, I'm Paul Fleischman, here to talk to you, along with Melissa Sweet, about our book, Alphamaniacs. Thank you to the Maine Writers and Publishers Association for giving us this chance. And I'm going to kick it off by talking a bit about how such a crazy book came about. As you might imagine, it started way back when. When the Saturday Review would come in my household, my parents would open it up to the back where there was the cryptogram. And my mother would copy it out on another piece of paper, and my parents would race each other to complete it. That's the kind of house I grew up in. It was the kind of house furnished not just with the usual appliances, but a telescope, a shortwave radio, and very importantly for this book, a printing press, a hand printing press. So my sisters and I all learned to set type, to read backwards as the type was put in the composing stick. And I had my own printing business in junior high and high school, and was used to looking at language in terms, in purely visual terms, as well as for meaning. When I was 10 years old, I got a book that really kicked off Alphamaniacs. It's an incredible book. It goes in and out of print regularly, but you could find a copy. It is called Ounce, Dice, Trice. It's by Alistair Reid, a Scottish poet and translator, and it has memorable illustrations by Ben Shawn, the only children's work that Shawn did. Take a look. What will you find? All kinds of crazy stuff about language. Definitions of obscure words put together in chains of words. You will find lists of names that would be good if you need to name a whale, if you need to name a cat. You will find lists of words for times of day. You will find lists of words that sound like counting from 1 to 10. Ounce, dice, trice, quartz, quince, sago, serpent, oxygen, nitrogen, denim. When I read that book, suddenly I realized that language could do more than just convey facts back and forth. It wouldn't be like the currency we have in our pockets or our wallets that we don't pay much attention to, that's well worn and just as a means to an end. It could be an end in itself. Words had beautiful shapes. They had interesting arrangements. Some of them were the same backwards as forward. There's a list of those in Ounce, Dice, Trice. They had great sounds. And a few years later in high school, I really came upon a work that showed me the sounds of language. It's called Geographical Fugue. Maybe some of you have heard it. It's on YouTube, so you can see what I'm talking about. It is a fugue, just like the kind that J.S. Bach wrote so well. But instead of being played on instruments, instead of being sung, it is spoken. And what's it made up of? Geographical place names. Trinidad, and the big Mississippi, and the town Honolulu, and the Lake Titicaca, Popocatépetl in Canada, rather in Mexico, Trinidad, and on we go. Sopranos, altos, tenors, and basses. An incredible piece. A friend of mine heard it in high school, wrote a piece somewhat similar, and I and he and 2 others performed it at an arts night at our school, and I was hooked. Turned out that the composer of Geographical Fugue, Ernst Talk, lived a few blocks from me in Santa Monica, California. Didn't know that till much, much later. Wish I'd known at the time. Well, that got me going. I wrote my own first performance piece, just made out of words, for 3 speakers and 3 rhythm instruments when I was 18 in my first year at Berkeley. And then the key thing happened. That was another, 20 years down the line. It was reading a mention that the French writer Georges Perec had written a book in which there was no letter E. It wasn't a short book. It was a novel, a detective story, called in French La Disparition, which doesn't have E's, translated into English, couldn't use disappearance, translated as a void. Actually, it's been translated more than once. Wow, what an idea. I read a bit about Perec, found out about the group he was part of called Oulipo, and was fascinated by the works they produced, which often had strange, very demanding, very daunting constraints, like writing a book with no E. and I was hooked. I decided that I would give myself a constraint. I would write a play about 26 word nuts, like Perec, like Talk, like Alistair Reid, one surname per alphabet letter. Well, I started. I had 3 letters down already. It took me a long time, many years, to get them all, and my cast was constantly changing. I'd have, a great A, a great B, but maybe not such a great C. So I'd be looking for a C, and I'd find a good C, and that would knock out my D because maybe they were both dictionary makers, and I couldn't have them side by side. So it was a challenge. Eventually, it was done. The play was produced at City University of New Jersey with a great troupe, Actors Theater Company, cast of 4, which was a master of ceremonies snapping a genuine whip, and 3 other people played all the parts. It was a circus sideshow of these strange characters, and it was great. It had a problem, though. It was troublesome to produce because I had to get the rights to perform all kinds of pieces that were in it. That was a lot of work. And it was a little hard on the audience. The material was dense in places and went by quickly. A book was actually a much better choice. And so some years after the play, I decided to put it into a book. And that's the book you see in front of you now, if you've seen it, with its great cover by Melissa. I'm going to take you through just one of the chapters of the book and show you some photos that aren't in the chapter to give you an idea of the kind of people we're talking about. And the chapter I'm going to talk about is the one with David Bryce. And it's all about miniature books. So let's see here. And there's some miniature writing. That is a notebook of mine from when I was in my college years. Teachers who had me regularly decided to take up other fields of endeavor. That's 4 lines of writing with a pencil in between the 2 lines on a notebook page. Why would someone do that? Well, I don't know why, but I just did. I kind of like the idea of turning letters into art, just turning them into this block, this gray block of text. Turns out that I was part of a long, long tradition of tiny writing. How long? That long, all the way back to the Sumerians and cuneiform, the earliest writing we have. Among the tablets we've found are a miniature tablet, just 1.5 inches square with tiny little wedge shapes. People have been doing things like this for a long, long time. Let's go forward to this book, the Gutenberg Bible. If you've ever seen one, you know it is anything but miniature. It is big. It is 17 inches high. A page is 12 inches wide, and the book itself weighs over 50 pounds. Today's miniature bookmakers define a miniature book as anything smaller than 3 inches square. So no dimension can be bigger than 3. That is not this book. But it wasn't long after the 1450s, when Gutenberg printed this, that people got to thinking about what movable type could do for tiny books. Here's a teeny tiny book that belonged to Anne Boleyn. It's a prayer book, not a full Bible. Full Bible wasn't possible. They didn't have paper thin enough. They didn't have type small enough. But they could make little prayer books, or sometimes thumb Bibles that were portions of the Bible. If I'm not mistaken, this book was taken with Anne Boleyn to the chopping block. Fast forward a few more 100 years and books have gotten smaller. This one is about 1/2 inch square. It's produced in Holland by a Dutch printer who wanted to advertise his skills. And it set the record and held the record for a couple of centuries, really. Over those centuries, type got smaller. Most type in a book today would be called 12-point type or thereabouts. Well, they eventually got down to 10, 8, 6, 4, 3, and then 2 point type, which is called fly's eye type. Paper got thinner, and therefore 2 Italian printers in the 1870s could produce an edition of the Divine Comedy by Dante. Not the Bible, but a long piece. It was over 800 pages, and it was under 3 inches square. Fast forward a few more years, and we get to David Bryce, the subject of the chapter in Alphamaniacs. He was a Scottish printer who helped pioneer thin paper, but his real breakthrough was realizing that you could print from photolithographic plates. Instead of setting type, you could take some small, something already set in type, reduce it photographically, and print those plates. Nobody said that was illegal, and so he did. And in 1895, he did a New Testament, and the next year he succeeded, finally, 400 years almost after Gutenberg, 450, 15, 16, 17, yeah, more than 400 years in producing a miniature Bible. Wow, what a work. It came with a little pocket, which had a magnifying glass in it, and judging by the size of the thumb in this photo, you would need that magnifying glass. The story didn't stop there. You know, obsessives keep obsessing. If they climb Everest, they're going to climb something else. Afterwards, they're going to do all 7 summits of all the highest points of all the continents. Currently their age. Well, in printing, what did they do? They said, okay, the Bible's been done. What else could we do and do it even smaller? Yep, that's pretty small. That is a Japanese book about flowers. We're now measuring not in inches, but in millimeters. And that was the first book that I know of to break the 1 millimeter by 1 millimeter barrier. Then we get down to this book. That is a short story by Chekhov called The Chameleon, published by a Russian printer. That held the record for a while. And then we get to something truly astounding. Yes, a Nano Bible, printed with a stream of ions on a chip of silicon. And that is either the Old Testament or the whole Bible. I've seen different opinions on that. That was just done a few years ago in Israel. And I think that's going to hold the record for a while, but only for a while. Things are always changing. Okay. Stop share. And we're back. So that's the kind of people in this book. Before I turn it over to Melissa, I'd like to give you an idea of what I was after in this book. Of course, I want it to be entertaining, interesting, inspiring to writers who would see that there's more than one way to skin a cat, that you don't have to just follow the bestseller list as your models. There's all kinds of projects out there waiting. And that leads me to my other motive for the book, which was a defense of the arts, kind of a two-pronged defense. If you look at what those printers had to do to conquer the miniature Bible, you will see that the arts are not easy. The arts are hard. The arts are full of open-ended questions with no right answer. They're very difficult. They're draining. They take a lot of persistence. They take imagination. They take collaboration often. They take divergent thinking. In fact, that whole list is the very traits we're going to need to solve the various problems that surround us on every hand, from the environment to politics to justice to you name it. So that would be my practical defense of the arts. Why should you spend money on it? Because those imaginers are going to rescue you. They're the people we're going to need. There's a less practical, but just as powerful defense of the arts all through Alphamaniacs. And it's this. I worked on a stage crew, volunteered stage crew on a production of Annie some years ago. I was amazed to see how many other people there were working on that thing. I mean, the cast was big, but the crew was gigantic. There were seamstresses, there were wranglers of all the kids. There were choreography aides, there were coaches in music. There were the 3 different people who managed the 3 different dogs who played Sandy. There was sound, there was lighting, there was stage crew. My group, we had to learn a very complicated choreography for switching sets, for moving props, a whole dance that the audience never saw. It was fascinating. And one of the greatest things about it, it was virtually all unpaid labor. Everybody was volunteering just about. All for what? To put on a show for the community. It was wonderful to behold. And Alphamaniacs is full of people who did things not for riches, not for fame, but just because. Lloyd Alexander, the Newbery-winning author, memorably said that laughter is the oxygen of the spirit. And I would think he would agree that curiosity is just as important, and creativity, and connection with others, and play, all of those things. A life, we have a word for a life with a great roof over your head, but no such connection, no joy, no beauty, no play. And that word is empty. A life without play is lifeless. And the Alphamaniacs epitomize people who played, who were curious, who had persistence, who took those interests farther than most people. Way, way, way. They explored the most distant shores of language. And now I'm going to turn it over to Melissa and let her show you all what she put into the book, which is considerable.
A little transition here?
Yeah.
How's it look? Are we there?
Great.
Great, thank you. So welcome everybody and thank you. I don't know about you, but I wish I could hear Paul talk about all 26 chapters that way. It's insane. These are definitely all of our people, right? So Paul and I overlap with children's books, but we also overlap with some of these people too. And one of the things that I fell in love with was, as Paul mentioned, how obsessive they were, compulsive, determined, passionate, and the sense of play, just like the Dada and Surrealists, that some of whom are in the book. And another place where we overlap is this world of miniature books. This is one of the first books I made, and it was at a time when I wanted to do books, I wanted to be published, but that was taking quite a while. And I thought, meanwhile, I'll learn everything I can about how to make a book, how to design a book. And I had this great opportunity to learn hand lettering and make paper, cut paper, bind books. This book was commissioned by a wonderful rare book dealer in Boston, Bromer Booksellers. And if you haven't seen the new documentary, The Booksellers, this is that world. And I'm indebted to them, to the Bromers, because they took a chance on me at a time when I was just a kid and with a crazy dream, that's for sure. And this was bound by a wonderful German bookbinder. So it launched me into this world I knew nothing about, but was so rich and really confirmed for me the book was my particular object that I wanted to keep exploring. And the idea of the alphabet and fonts and hand lettering just became a huge part of learning how a book is designed. There's a drawer behind me actually of alphabets. It is stuffed to the gills. It's about as organized as I get collage-wise by saying alphabets, and anything that's a letter goes in there. I get a manuscript like Paul's, and one of the biggest joys is reading about these people and understanding who they are and how can they be synthesized to one piece of art within the book. Is it going to be, as Paul said, is it going to be funny? Is it going to represent their process, or maybe the tools that they use, etc.? So this was really, this is like a perk of our job, I think, to do the research. Whoops, I'm sorry, I went too far there. Doris Cross is, I'm not sure which chapter number, doesn't matter. She is an inspiration to me. She's an artist who does found poetry, or did found poetry. And her supplies, her material was early dictionary pages. So she took a dictionary page and she took away everything that she created poems, I should say, by finding them and then either whiting out or blacking out all the other words. So as Paul mentions in the book, it becomes, this book, the dictionary, becomes a book that seemed frozen, was suddenly wiggling with new messages. And the possibilities are endless in this format. I feel like everybody should try their hand at one of these found poems because you can't go wrong. And the beauty is that another one of her parameters, of course, she left the words right where they were. And you can see this is a bee page, so there's lots of little tiny bees isolated. This becomes an artistic interpretation for her. In researching, I went to Austin Kleon, who many of you know who he is. He's a wonderful weekly newsletter doing blackout poems. He subsequently introduced me to Mary Ruffel fairly recently, who did whiteout poems. And then there's many people who do this, but Paul mentions also Tom Phillips. His book, A Humament, is short for a human document, taking a Victorian novel, page by page, he recreates a new story with all different kinds of art on it. And each page is wildly different from the next. So this was part of my reference as well, in addition to looking at Doris Cross's work. Of course, a little bit of method acting doesn't hurt. So buying a few vintage dictionaries of the type that Doris would have used helped. My process was to Xerox a page just in case it was the right page and I actually found a poem that I wanted and I hadn't like kind of butchered it up yet. So I did a few of these, and the one that is in the book to emulate Doris was this one, Hello Hero, about Robin being the herald of spring. And I found it wildly satisfying to do this. You honestly, you can't go wrong. And if you mess up, you just find another word. And a lot of them are fully illustrated this way too. So in this book, I found that the people all had their own parameters for discovering what it was they wanted to do, like writing a novel without the letter E, and Paul can talk more about more individuals, but the parameters for me artistically were, of course, finding the synthesis of someone, but also printing in my studio, and locally people will know Pickwick Press. So I went to a letterpress printer and printed very large letters to use within the collages as well. There's a wall on my studio to see how it's going and what I'm working on. And then this is just a sampling of some of the people in the book. It's held together by type and color and those old vintage papers. There's a lot of age in this book. There's older people, things happened a long time ago, but I wanted the book to feel as zippy and explosive as it feels to read Paul's chapters, because I feel like he's brought it into this incredibly contemporary, exciting place. So lastly, for the illustrators and anyone in the room that wants to see a little process about the cover, one of the most important things and the last thing that I always do, playing with type and how the cover is going to read. It's a fairly long cover with a hefty subtitle. So I'm playing here. We probably did 8 versions. Maybe it was going to be 3-dimensional. It ended up this as my sketch and the final cover. And here's an example of teamwork, because everyone at Candlewick was very trusting that the cover on the sketch on the left would be as we hoped. And to be honest, there's a lot of, I love the word chance. I think maybe Paul used it, I'm not sure, but you go with an idea and then you make it work. There's no divine intervention here. It's about gathering materials and pushing them around long enough till you make that concept work, or you discard it. But I think that's part of the fun of working, and maybe being that we're all a little bit compulsive, a little bit of alphamaniacs. So this is my portion of the talk. We'll go to questions in a minute. But meanwhile, we have something for you from Candlewick. So I want to thank Candlewick for giving us 5 books and 10 poetry kits. And I think Gibson has the winners. Let me get out there.
Sorry, I muted myself, everybody. And then I forgot. We do have 5 winners of books and 10 winners of magnetic poetry kits. I'm gonna read off the names of the winners, and we'll follow up with an email to make sure we get your address. These winners will have to wait a little while to receive their winnings, because this is gonna come from Candlewick, and it's going to probably take into the summer to get these things in the mail and all that, but they will be coming to you. So, and big thanks to Candlewick for doing it. So the book winners are, and by the way, what we did is we just took all the names of everybody at the event and we fed them into a random name picker, and here's what happened. So the book winners are Ying Dang, Cece Bell, Isaac Sturdivant, sorry if I'm not getting that right, Vanessa Koster, and Summer Laurie. Those are the 5 winners of books. And the 10 winners of magnetic poetry kits include Emily Reynolds, Kirsten Cappy, Jamie Hogan, Ben Sapp, Jane Babbitt, Edith Kroll, Courtney Prawl, Astrid, I don't have Astrid's last name, Bethany Morrill, and Anna Miller. So as I said, congrats to all, and we'll send you an email and make sure we get your address. And in a brief moment, we are going to take some questions. But before we do that, we have a surprise that Melissa and Paul do not know about. I would like to invite a crew of Alphamaniacs from across the country, I believe, to share a little something.
So there are 26 of you out there. If you're one of them, please unmute your audio, turn on the video, stand by. Oh, these faces. I love these faces. And when it's your turn, speak loudly and boldly. Are we ready? Oh, and you can mute yourself afterwards. Okay? Ready, set, go. A.
D.
D. D.
E. E.
I didn't see F. G.
H. H. I.
J. It's backwards. No.
K.
Ow! Ow!
Beautiful.
I don't know what. Ow!
M.
See, Paul. Ow!
You're big on mine.
M. M. N. N. N.
Oh.
N. N.
P.
Q. Q.
R.
Oh.
Nice.
X.
S.
Why?
So many letters. V.
V. Oh,
T.
V. V. There you go.
And here's you.
V. V. V.
I think did we get them? We got them all. Didn't we get them all? I think we did. Thank you all for doing that. That's amazing. It's great to see all those letters of so many different kinds. If you just gave us a letter, if you could go ahead and mute yourself again, that would be great. And we are going to move to some questions. And I actually want to just kick it off by asking Paul to talk a little bit about where the idea for this book came from, how it got started. Paul, do you want to say a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, it came from a lot of different places. This was certainly one of those places. Ounce, Dice, Trice, a fabulous book that, if you can see closely, I have had for over 50 years. It's by Alistair Reid, a poet and translator. And what is it? It's just a strange combination of lists of odd words and definitions of obscure words and words that sound like counting to 1 to 10, like ounce, dice, trice, quartz, quince, sago, serpent, oxygen, nitrogen, denim. Incredible things that showed me that language was more than just communicating, pass the salt, here's the ketchup. It could do a lot more than that. That letters were interesting all on their own, and words had great shapes. Some of them read the same backwards as forwards. So that got me going, at age 10 or 11. Various things happened after that. I found out about some of the other people in the book. Ernst Toch, who wrote Geographical Fugue, who made a perfect JS box style fugue just out of geographical place names. And a friend of mine found out about that, wrote a similar piece that was performed at our high school, and I was one of the speakers. That was the forerunner, that led to my poems for 2 and 4 voices decades later. Reading about Georges Perec and his novel Without the Letter E got my attention for sure. And suddenly I realized, I knew a lot of some of these people. I thought I had enough for a play. I saw it as a performance because I saw Geographical Fugue being performed and somebody reciting the ounce, dice, trice list that sounded like 1 to 10. And so I did, and I gave myself the same kind of constraint that Perec did, 26 characters, 1 surname per letter. That was actually a really difficult constraint to work under. It caused the play to take me years longer, but it was also exciting. I was constantly had certain letters I was looking out for, watching for. I needed an M, I needed an O, I needed an H. And so it gave a lot of pleasure in life from looking for those things and finally putting it all together. So it was a play first. Problem with the play is the material is a little dense. This material is, some of it can be a little abstruse. Wait till you get to the word games from Ross Eckler and the people in Wordways. As those of you who've read the book know, wow, we're not talking about Hangman here. No, no, no.
Sorry.
And so people in the audience were kind of scratching their heads. So a book lets you reread things, lets you read them at your leisure. The 26 letters per surname constraint fell away in the book, which was actually a good thing. I was at first sorry to see it go, and then I saw the great advantages. I could get a much better cast. What if I had two incredible Ps, you know, Georges Perec and somebody else? I could put them both in now. I could change the order. So I was limited by the alphabet before. What if you had two dictionary makers back to back? Couldn't do that. So I'd have to find somebody else, you know. So there were some advantages. I think it's much better in a book, really. And with Melissa's gorgeous art, much, much better. So those were some of the things that went into the book.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. All right, let's take some questions from the audience. We have a bunch of questions that have come through in the chat. Why don't we start? Meg Lakemore is out there, and she has a question from her students at Mecca, Maine College of Art. Meg, do you want to go ahead and ask that?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, so I am teaching a children's lit course at Mecca this semester, and we have spent a lot of time examining how images and text work together or against each other to tell a story. And I would love to hear how you as creators think about the relationship between text and images. Thank you.
Melissa, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I can start with that a little bit. Well, historically, we have a manuscript and it's illuminated. So there was always there was often merging of words and images, and in a manuscript too, we have sometimes had those illuminated big letters. That was an early way of illustrating a manuscript too. And I think to my eye, it was when the Dada people started playing with type in a way that was so outrageous, it became something else. That if there's an opportunity to play with it, I think you push it to make it gigantic, or as Paul showed us, really small. There's a technical part of merging words and images in a book, and that's how big are the pictures going to be, how much room is it going to take up, how do we want the text and the font to merge with that. And I feel as though in a picture book, when we have the manuscript and we have the art, but when we figure out that typeface, then the book just starts to sing. And it's really that marriage of those two with the typeface and fonts really makes all the difference in how a book feels to my eye. That's sort of a short answer, but lucky students to have you, Megan. So bravo. Yeah. Paul, do you have anything you want to add?
I do. I write in all kinds of genres, some of them without names, like Alphamaniacs. And I have to say that picture books are, for me, the most exciting genre ever, and always will be. I will always come back to picture books because having art along with the text is so incredibly exciting, the things you can do. And I always give my illustrators more than half the job of telling the story. That means I can leave out a lot of things and let them put it in and let them imagine it. Kevin Hawkes's work on Westlandia is a great case in point. He invented the look of Westlandia, totally. And the words got fewer and fewer until I finally did a wordless book with him, Sidewalk Circus. I tried it with words first, decided didn't really need it. Just describe the story for him to do. So I will say from the author's point of view, very exciting, more exciting than a novel, much more.
Great. So we want to go to Sarah Cordova, who has a question. Sarah, do you want to ask your question?
Sure, thank you so much. I am wondering about process. I talk to kids all over about the writing process, and so I'm always fascinated to hear from authors and illustrators how long from like the idea concept to the actual publication date text take. So I'm wondering when this idea came to you and then how long of a process it took for you.
Well, for me to get it from the starting to when Melissa got it, that was probably a good 10 years of collecting material, filing it away, organizing it, trying it in various shapes, getting the play put together. And then there was a long period after the play. It didn't occur to me to make it into a book for a while. And once Melissa got it, take it.
Oh, I think it was more than a year. It's a little fuzzy to me now, but much of the time is spent researching. So I'm gathering the books, I'm reading the books, I'm sketching. My concepts in the dummy are painfully loose. And as I said, I honestly don't know until I begin to play and make something what I'm going to do. I have a rough idea and it changes dramatically. So there's a lot of trust involved, but I think each page for me is about at least a day and a half. Once I know what I'm doing, leading up to that can take weeks. And I'm not doing one page a day. I'm moving around, I'm moving forward. Think probably 4 to 6 hours of heightened creative work a day is about right. And then it's puttering from there. So I try not to overdo it. Yeah.
Great. All right. So Stephanie Heinz has a question. Stephanie, do you want to jump in here?
Yeah. Hi. So a question for you both. I was wondering, in a book that's filled with interesting and surprising things, what did you find to be the most interesting or the most surprising while you were doing all of that great research?
Well, gosh, that's hard. Actually the chapter that Melissa talked about with Doris Cross and the word subtractors, I found that pretty interesting. I didn't know that world existed till I stumbled upon it. And, there's other examples there beyond what Melissa talked about. People have taken the 9/11 commission report and subtracted from it and gotten another book out of it. One woman took Emily Dickinson's poetry written during the Civil War and abstracted from it poems about current wars with Americans in Afghanistan and the Middle East. I mean, it's just an incredible world of what people have thought to do by subtracting out parts of works. I found that riveting.
There's just so many quirky people and processes. One of the ones that moved me the most, though, was the second chapter about, I hope I'm saying his name correctly, Jean-Dominique Bauby. And he was French, and the movie The Diving Bell and the Butterfly was made about his story, where he was living an absolutely normal life. One day suffered this incredibly massive stroke and ended up in the hospital, and he was only able to blink one eye. That was the amount of movement that he had. However, working with the nurses, and Paul, maybe you can correct me, possibly family, they were able to say a letter, and they used the alphabet judiciously. So they would start maybe with the vowels and say, and he would blink if they hit the right letter. And he wrote an entire memoir this way. So the idea of perseverance is huge in all these people, I think. Can you talk more about that, Paul?
Yeah, I can tell you that the movie, well, I would recommend reading the book, The Diving Bell and the Butterfly. The movie is surprisingly accurate and really strong, and is filmed as if through Bobby's eye once he's in the hospital. It's incredible. But it's a brief, wonderfully written book, which he composed sentence by sentence in his head, got it all put together, and then he was ready to dictate it one letter at a time. And I believe he died 2 days after the book was published. So it kept him going. Yeah, incredible.
That is incredible. We have a question that I'll just read. Melissa, this is for you. Someone's wondering, do you go treasure hunting for your collage materials anywhere in particular or everywhere, or where do you find what you find and what you put in?
That's a great question. I used to go a lot more treasure hunting, and I try to restrain myself at this point. The studio tends to be bursting with stuff, and people are incredibly generous. Somebody found a wonderful stamp collection in a dumpster that they retrieved for me, and I have amazing stuff. But the curious thing is to let each book dictate what the materials will be. So at this point, I feel like I have 10,000 more things than I'll ever use. And I sometimes wonder, if I walked away from the studio and started fresh, what would I do? So, but Portland, Maine has some amazing places. We've got great ephemera shows and free-for-all, yard sales galore. And you start to get an eye for something you can't live without. And that's it for me. If I can't live without this, I get it and hope that I'll use it someday. So it's a great question.
That's a great question. Charlotte Agell has a question. Charlotte, do you want to jump on here and ask your question?
Sure. Hi. Thanks, Melissa and Paul. I just want to say my 6th graders and I read Joyful Noise, and then we make Poems for Two Voices anthologies every year. And I'm glad we did it before distance teaching because they were spiral bound. But anyway, I can't wait to have this book in the classroom. And my question for both of you is sort of silly. Maybe it's kind of a 6th grade question. Do you have, either in general or maybe just today, a favorite letter, graphically or otherwise?
Well, I can answer that. Can you see this? It says A book. And I have some wonderful calligraphers in Albuquerque, most of them. And they do great group projects. They get together, they decide on a project, they disperse. 6 months later, they get together, and they've made 7 copies of it, and they assemble these group projects, mainly calligraphy based. And they did one on the letter A. And in calligraphy, there's something called the 100-word marathon that a calligrapher came up with to stretch the imagination. So his idea was the first 50 variations on A you do will be the usual sort of answers. We'll run through the main stuff. After 50, then you'll have to dig and you'll come up with new, interesting things. And so they each did 100 A's, and they put them in this book, and they each invited a writer. You know, you can look at it, but unfortunately it was privately printed and is not available. They each invited a writer to write an essay about the letter A. I was one of the writers, and we all had fun. And so I love A. A is just, everything I said about picture books is true of A. It's endlessly fascinating, endlessly. Let me just show you what can be done with the letter A. See the dachshund holding its leash? So this A right here, that looks like a Chinese character a bit. That's done by Mike Gold, and he's in Alphamaniacs. He went beyond 100 A's. He got to 200, then 300, then 400, then 500, then 600, then 700, then 800. Where did he stop? You'll have to read the book.
Melissa, what about you?
Yeah, that's such a hard question because, you know, they're like your children, right? You love them all for different reasons, but I totally get Paul's love of A. Yes. One thing in calligraphy that's really interesting, I'm gonna get out of this by saying something different, is that the connectors from one letter to another is as crucial as the letter itself. So how do you get from B to C, and how do you get from C to Z? And so that, I suppose you could talk to a font designer to see how technical that can get. But I think what I love especially about Paul's chapter on the letter A in this book, in Alphamaniacs, is how he talks about, we get to talk about a little bit about the technical terminology for a letter. and all those nuances I just find endlessly fascinating, that there's a name for everything on a letter. You know, the top, the feet, the cross, it all has a wonderful, you know, dialogue about it. Yeah. Thank you.
Wonderful. We have a question from Marguerite. You want to ask your question? I'm hoping I might be mispronouncing your name. Marguerite Roers?
Yep, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great, even all the way from Canada, you can hear me. Thank you so much for this. It's exciting to see both of you, as well as all the participants, and experience my first online Zoom book launch. Congratulations to both of you. As a writer, I know that I often am not involved in the illustrating process. So I submit a manuscript and the publisher decides on who will be the illustrator, and I often don't know that person. And the only contact I have with them is through my editor. And I'm wondering if that was the same for you, or how intensely you were both involved in the illustrating process, or if the whole thing was a surprise for Paul, or how much you collaborated.
Well, we did know each other, which indeed is not always the case at all. But I think the illustrator should have the same freedom with the art that the author had with the words. And so, no, I did not look over Melissa's shoulder until it was all pretty much done.
Interesting.
That's fairly typical. And it in a way, I think it's got to be difficult for authors not to see anything along the way and to really trust that they're going to bring something genuine to the party, so to speak. But it does work best if the illustrator has free reign and doesn't feel constrained by making someone happy or wondering what they want. So I think it's ideal to have people become your friends afterward. That's when they're happy, it's awesome. But historically the industry does keep us somewhat separate. And I've only had a few authors over the long time I've been making books that we've had some interaction, and it's often with nonfiction, and that it's important sometimes to make sure we are having conversations that are for accuracy, but especially in a picture book. I mean, like Paul gave Kevin Hawkes free reign to illustrate his idea, I'm sure there were words for Sidewalk Circus, but there are literally no words in that book, and Kevin ran with it. So I think it's a lot of trust, right, Paul? Would you say?
Yeah.
But thanks for asking.
Fascinating, thank you.
We've just got time for a few more, I think. We have a question from Phoebe Smith, who is a Maine College of Art student. Phoebe, did you want to ask your question?
Hello. Yeah, it was for Melissa. I was wondering, how much of your research do you do on the internet, or are there other sources that you go to first before you like type up on Google what you're looking for when you're like coming up with illustrations?
Yeah, that's really interesting because I predate Google. So I had to learn another way. And that was this amazing thing, our libraries. But the thing about the libraries is that you might be looking for something, but there's all this serendipity that happens along the way that's really rich. So I in all honesty, I definitely use the internet. I have to. I use the internet to make sure I could get a hold of all those books that you saw for my research. But if it's especially nonfiction, one of the most pleasurable things is planning a trip to go see a manuscript or a document, or to a rare book library where there's the papers of, say, an author you want to work on, or to Cornell and read E.B. White's manuscripts. There's nothing like it. It puts you in so much deeper that you just don't know what's going to happen. And I think that that's part of the pleasure and reward of doing books, is that it's so unpredictable what can happen that I'm sure Paul found tons of stuff in Alphamaniacs that he couldn't have imagined, that just sort of showed up by talking to somebody or a dealer or whatever. So we need both, no question about it. It's imperative to have both at this point. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, thank you for your question, Phoebe. We have a couple of questions from, I think these are a couple of young folks. One of them wants to know, for both Paul and Melissa, when did you decide to become an author or illustrator, or both?
When I was about to graduate from college and realized I had to do something. I mean, I'd been interested in writing before that, but I was actually headed toward a career as teaching history, I thought. But I wrote a picture book in my last year of college and it was bought, and I never looked back. And instead, I just brought a lot of history into my books instead. It was the best of both worlds. The same for music.
Oh, it's because of this.
Oh, yeah.
And I didn't know I wanted to do children's books at all. I loved making stuff, and I felt like I just felt I'd always be an artist in some way or another. And part of it is trying to find the kind of art that you would want to sell. So how are you going to sell that? Are you going to be an artist and be in a gallery? Do you want to be a puppeteer and be on Broadway? What do you love more than anything? And then find a venue for it. So I loved all the things that I do in books, the actual physical making of assemblages, playing with type and fonts, and it's just always different and always new. So I feel really lucky that I get to do it. I feel like I get to do everything I could want to do. And that said, oh yeah, I want another few lifetimes to like explore it all, but I think you gravitate toward, you just keep looking at what you love and decide that that's where you're going to go and see what happens.
Cool. We have a follow-up to that question, which is, if you had not become an author or illustrator, what would you be doing?
Oh man.
I would love to be in music or teaching history still, but I'm probably unemployable at this point. You know, I'm too used to doing things my own way on my own schedule. I think books are it for me.
Well, let's see. Yes, books are it for me too. And when I was a kid, I had a donut delivery route. And a couple of days ago, I was going past Holy Donut and I thought, why don't I just get a donut delivery route again? I would like really know my neighbors. So I wouldn't mind a bicycle delivery route if I didn't have to do it like, 9 hours a day. But I don't know, there's something really fun about getting on your bike, getting something and delivering it to somebody. That sounds incredibly silly, but I think especially because we're not seeing any people at this moment, it just sounds blissful to me right now. I don't know. Thanks for asking though.
These are wonderful questions. I think we're gonna wrap it up there. Here's my copy of this beautiful book. I want to just say one last time to make sure to order a copy from either print in Portland, Maine, or Hicklebee's in San Jose. This has been a really fun event. Thanks, Melissa and Paul, for doing it, and thanks to everybody for being here. I don't know if either of you wants to say anything before we close up shop here.
I just want to say thank you to the Alphamaniacs, who that was as fun as the first time I saw Sesame Street. I was so blown away by that. And Paul Fondrasic, that you were a little late on the V was fantastic. It was just wonderful. So I love my community. Thank you all for being here. I really love you guys. Stay safe.
And I'll say the same. Whoever made the letter R, that was awesome too. with the water bird with the long legs. Great work. And get out there and play.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Take care. Have a good night.
Bye-bye.
Take care, everybody.